Good morning and welcome to the Public File. I'm Doug Thomas, and my guests for this segment are Ashlie Bryant, co-founder, president, and CEO of 3Strands Global Foundation, and Jenny Davidson, major gifts officer. Good morning, ladies.
Good morning.
Well, let's start with a little background. What are your roles at 3Strands Global Foundation, and what's the mission?
I'll jump in. This is Ashlie Bryant, and really for the last 12 years, my role has been as CEO and co-founder of 3Strands, and our mission is to mobilize communities to combat human trafficking through prevention education and reintegration programs, which really are how do we find jobs and education that's sustainable for survivors. And our vision is a world free from human trafficking. It's a great big vision, and our mission is pretty targeted around prevention. But that's my role at 3Strands for the last 12 years. Jenny?
I'm Jenny Davidson. I am the major gifts officer. So my role is to fund the awesome work being done by Ashlie and the team to make sure that survivors have the resources that they need and that we're able to get in and do the other work that's so vital to our community.
If someone's not familiar, please define human trafficking for our listeners.
I think, Doug, for us, really, we see this as an umbrella. So if you picture visually, because it helps that way, but think of an umbrella, and human trafficking, the term is written on top of the umbrella, and this umbrella has two arms. One of those arms is forced labor, and the other one is commercial sexual exploitation. Human trafficking is an umbrella term for the two most focused areas of human trafficking in the United States, those that we have data on, and that the National Trafficking Hotline continues every year to be able to research and explore the cases.
How does 3Strands Global Foundation advocate on the issue of human trafficking?
We really focus in on what I said initially, which is prevention, and prevention through education and prevention through employment. And so our advocacy is really for our clients. Our clients in both of those segments are students and youth and anyone in around education, including parents and social services, and even those who are, attached or one step away from the actual school campus. But then also in the sphere of employment, our clients who are survivors of human trafficking that we're serving and advocating on behalf of. So we believe that prevention changes everything, and our advocacy comes in those two areas, and then sort of also comes in this third space that we call our third E of the three E's: education, employment, and engagement. And that's our legislative work, because we believe that policy can truly help us to solve and disrupt the crime of human trafficking. And so wherever we can be hopeful and advocate on behalf of solid legislation that actually focuses in on the two areas that we know and have worked for 12 years, then we are advocating on behalf of those clients in that sphere.
And Doug, as you know, I have spent 26 years on the side of really mostly intervention. So somebody who's already been horrifically traumatized, then attempting to assist them in reclaiming their lives and living the life that they want. And that's a beautiful thing, and we do that here. But what I'm super, super excited about also is, in addition to that, these big community changes and looking at legislation, looking at how do we train teachers to recognize trauma in the classroom so that they can work with those students maybe a little bit differently and encourage them through different programs, like even with the employment, and informing the employers about understanding the trauma that the survivors they may be hiring have gone through, and understanding how to work with a traumatized population. So it goes so deep and impacts the community in a lot of different ways.
That's such a good point, Jenny, because I think that the other piece of the advocacy that we are always reflecting on is how are we listening to survivors and lived experience experts in this space, our entire agency as well as the community, to be able to know that we're doing our best to advocate for those who are being trafficked, right? So how do we, in the communities that we serve, listen well, and really by listening well, then take the right steps to do the advocacy that they need, not the advocacy that we as an agency, think is what needs to be done, but really on the ground in the places that we serve across the U.S. How do we do that well?
Human trafficking, kind of something that's buried. It's not polite conversation. It's not top of mind for a lot of us. How prevalent is human trafficking in the United States?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I mentioned in the beginning the National Trafficking Hotline, which is housed in Washington, D.C. Every single year, they take the data, the calls that they receive. And I was actually looking just recently since 2007, they've received over 70,000 cases of human trafficking just in the hotline.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, and over 330,000 contact calls. And that's just the hotline. And that doesn't even look at maybe someone who doesn't know they're a victim of human trafficking and doesn't know the hotline, right? So the hotline, although really great that we have in the United States, it doesn't mean that's all of the cases or all of the victims.
Right.
There was a study done in San Diego by Dr. Amy Carpenter. That was a great study in 2016 that looked just in San Diego County in California. And they estimated in San Diego County between 3,000 and 8,000 victims of just sex trafficking in San Diego County. And so there's been studies like that. There was one done in Texas by the University of Texas in Austin that showed just in Texas over 300,000 victims of human trafficking. So there's different studies that have been done in different locations and not one in the U.S., on the whole. But the International Labor Organization also says that there's at least 100,000 victims of trafficking in the United States. So numbers are a little bit different, but I think we can all agree in this movement that it's one too many.
Right.
And that we need to be able to focus on the areas that we missionally are dedicated to and really start to disrupt trafficking from that space.
What are some of the myths of human trafficking?
Some of them are things like there's the belief that it's only people who are brought to the United States from other countries. So either we're importing victims of trafficking or other countries are, like in the movie Taken, they're there to try and traffic our local citizens over there. But what we see here locally is local people trafficking local people. And so it's not really that it has to have, you have to cross state lines or you have to have captured somebody and kept them locked in a room all chained up or anything like that. A lot of times, trafficked victims, I think 50% or close to that, are trafficked by a member of their own family.
Oh, my
goodness.
goodness.
So if you just look at that, it's horrific. And there's a place right now where it's happening today in our community. Those are a few. I know Ashlie has more.
It's a good question. We had this campaign we did not too long ago called Fact and Fiction. Jenny said it absolutely 100% accurate. Human trafficking, the fiction is human trafficking only happens outside the U.S. or that victims are only brought into the U.S. from overseas, right? Those are both fictional things.
Right.
Other fiction is there are not a high number of reported cases in someone's community. That must mean that trafficking doesn't happen. We know the fact is that most human trafficking cases go unreported, and we know that it could happen anywhere. Another fact is that it is common for a victim to know his or her trafficker. And like, Jenny just said, that this is not the movie Taken. This is not a take and grab crime. This is not stranger danger. That is the fiction, right? The fact is that most of the time a victim knows the trafficker, the person who's going to exploit them. Another fact, anyone can be a victim of human trafficking, and the fiction is that it could only be girls or women who are victims of human trafficking. We actually know that boys, men, and also those who are vulnerable in different vulnerable communities, including our LGBTQIA+ population. We know that our foster youth are often targeted specifically by traffickers. Anyone who is vulnerable is potentially someone who could be trafficked or targeted. But I think it's really important also, when we talk about facts as a movement, for us to be really clear that, yes, it does happen to a majority of women and girls, and especially women and girls of color, but it also happens to other genders and populations as well.
You're listening to The Public File. I'm Doug Thomas, and my guests this morning are Ashlie Bryant and Jenny Davidson of 3Strands Global Foundation, online at 3strandsglobalfoundation.org. That's the number 3, strandsglobalfoundation.org. We're about 2 years into this pandemic, and I'm assuming that the pandemic has made things a lot worse for what you guys are handling.
Yeah. Jenny and I were talking about this last week, that when the pandemic happened, you can imagine, trafficking happens online as well as in person. And so the fact that all of our youth were forced online and in school, that becomes a gateway for those who are exploiting to be able to have access to anyone, really, for that matter. But
sure.
In our space, we saw it with our youth. And even if you look at the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, their numbers just exploded as well of those who were reporting incidents of exploitation online during COVID. So we at 3Strands Global Foundation really said, okay, within our prevention education and prevention employment, how are we going to pivot? I don't like that word, but how are we going to pivot to make sure that we are meeting the needs of our clients? And so we very quickly, in a matter of weeks, actually created online distance learning for our teachers that were in the classroom with the students that the teachers were reaching, as well as our training has always been online for all of the educational staff. So that was actually not difficult and didn't use much of a pivot, but we created distance learning materials. And then for our Employ Plus Empower program, we actually put all of our resources on a platform that was really easy for our clients to be able to access. And so our survivors and at-risk populations, they actually could, if they chose, access resources online, or 6 feet with masks, they could be able to interact with our caseworkers and social workers. So we're serving almost 15% more than we did before, and year over year, as we look back at our numbers, we actually have looked, and it's almost a 40% increase in both programmings as we serve.
Wow.
What's really hard is those victims right now don't necessarily have access to people who would see a change in them when they were actually physically in school or physically around coworkers or things like that. They would be seen more. And if they showed up with a bruise or they showed up with increasing other kind of mental health problems or depression or things like that, there were people in their lives who would notice more. But with COVID, I think everyone in the whole country feels a little bit more isolated today than we did 3 years ago. So
Sure.
If you're a victim of a crime, that's just so much worse, so much more difficult. So there's a lot of impacts that you don't necessarily think of when you think of how COVID hit this generation.
Right.
And I think the other piece, Doug, is that traffickers didn't stop just because COVID happened and the pandemic happened.
Sure.
Right. In fact, they took advantage of any of the upset in our systems of protection for those who may be vulnerable. And I think that's really important as listeners, are listening, however it is that you might support this type of work at 3Strands, is to think about, wow, I hadn't thought about that. Traffickers didn't just stop, because of the pandemic. They tried to figure out how to pivot their businesses in this space.
What are some keys for advocates to consider in the fight against human trafficking?
Well, one really huge thing that I know the advocates at 3Strands are phenomenal about and that we can kind of train our communities around is understanding the impact of trauma and being able to really just meet those survivors where they're at, to not be judgmental about the horrific thing that's happened to them and understand something one of our staff said this week, and it just totally blew me away, is behavior is communication. So there may be a student out there, a young person or older person, right, who is exhibiting certain behaviors that are different or new for them and that may be concerning to the people around them, but they may not just come out and say, this happened to me,
right,
or this is still happening to me. So really pay attention and understand trauma. And there's so many trainings out there, and 3Strands does such a great job of making sure that employers or schools or whoever understands how trauma shows up with a survivor, because they're not necessarily, like I said earlier, they're not locked in a basement somewhere. They may still be living at home. They may still be in and out of other kinds of mainstream spaces. And this is all happening, behind closed doors or where, it's kind of this double life that sometimes is happening. And so when you see somebody showing up with concerning things going on, it's just really important to understand some steps to take there.
I love that you talked about that, because one of the things, it's really that we want advocates to know the signs, right? I actually was speaking this week on a panel, and someone had shared that a survivor lived experience expert had said, look, I was a student going to school, and after school I was being trafficked. And so what Jenny just said is so important, right? Oftentimes they're living amongst us in plain sight. victims of human trafficking. And so what are those signs that, maybe it's sudden possession of an expensive material item, or a second cell phone, or possession of multiple hotel room keys, or a fake ID, or that change in friendships or relationships or isolation, right? These are things that advocates can start to really look for. And we actually, on our website at 3Strands, have a lot of these signs. But I think people stepping into that place and saying, not only am I going to, protect myself, but also my community members. And so how do I become an advocate that looks out? And when I see something, I say something, right? And that doesn't mean I get myself involved or I put myself into a situation, because beyond a shadow of a doubt that those who are qualified, like law enforcement or nonprofit victim services agencies, those are the people to be able to do those stepping in moments. But it means that you call the National Trafficking Hotline, or that you are aware of the signs, so that you are a member of your community who is advocating on behalf of those who may be in plain sight.
What are some of the goals for 3Strands Global Foundation this year?
That is a great question. I love that question. So we have reached an estimated 500,000 youth through our PROTECT program, which is our prevention education program. And the goal is to blow it out of the water, not only this semester, but actually probably even more next semester, to 700,000 youth that we'll reach in all the states that we're working. And then it is actually since 2016, we've reached over 350 survivors and at-risk individuals through our Employ Plus Empower program. So we are hoping to increase that we're close or over 500 in that program. So that's just the programmatic piece. Jenny can talk to a little bit about what we're hoping from a fundraising perspective, but those are just some programmatic pieces. And then legislative, I can carry that too. I can talk about it.
So for fundraising, we're definitely trying to pump up those goals, because as we talked about earlier, it's an issue in our community that's increasing. It's not going away. And
right.
It's something where even just being able to buy a new kind of technology that furthers the mission, or investing in different things agency-wide, investing in our teams in order to make sure that we're able to serve that next survivor who, gets referred to us, or that next school district who wants education on the topic. And so that's where I come in. I'm brand new to the agency, super excited to be here, but that's my goal, is to raise those funds. And some of the ways that we're doing that are they're going to be showing up on some social media posts. So please do go to Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube even, and subscribe to our channel so that you're getting those updates and you're able to see as opportunities become available, or email us. My name's Jenny D at 3sgs.org, and just find out how you can become involved. Our website is 3strandsglobalfoundation.org. Just follow what we're doing. We're going to be participating in Big Day of Giving. We are hoping to double our previous highs, right? So we're really working hard to make sure that we're funding these programs, that we're not just expecting to close our eyes and hope it goes away, but we're actually putting our money where our mouth is and trying to really intervene and stand in the gap during this generation.
Really, it's how do we, within prevention education and prevention through employment, advance the mission for our clients, right? And Jenny's absolutely right that fundraising is a huge piece of how we do that. And so I would love for people to join us in that effort. And then I also think as a goal legislatively, we actually were super excited in 2018. Governor Brown signed AB 1227, which 3Strands Global Foundation was the sponsor of that legislation, and worked hard to make sure that Human Trafficking Prevention Education Act went through. And we've been really active in other states to help them see how we put together AB 1227. And then federally, there is a Reauthorization Act, H.R. 5150, that is Representative Bass and Representative Smith have put forward, that we have also been super big advocates of that Reauthorization Act. So I think, policy is important, and as many places as we can advocate and be a part of this year in 2022, we will be.
Such an important topic, and boy, did time fly by. We're almost out of time, but before we go, what can our listeners do to help 3Strands Global Foundation?
Yeah, well, Jenny talked about, which is great. You can go to our website. It's the number 3strandsglobalfoundation.org. You can follow us on all the social media channels. And really, for us, we're looking for partners in this space to be partners in employment for our Employ Plus Empower program. We are looking for partners who want to come alongside us financially as donors, as corporate donors or monthly donors or individual donors. We're looking for people who know of school districts and community groups that need prevention education. So if any of those places resonate with you, or you feel like you want to be able to, let us know that you'd like to volunteer in some capacity, then please, go to our website, and you can also email info, INFO, at 3sgs.org too, if you're interested.
Take a moment and just think of a young person in your life who you care deeply for, and just know that it's people like this. It's the young people who we want to prevent this from happening. We want to really secure their futures by making sure that they have a safe start in life. And we're out there in the schools, K through 12, really making sure to educate the school, the faculty, the students, everyone, in order to keep this world a safer place.
We are very proud to partner with you, and I will definitely have you ladies back soon. Thank you so much for joining me this morning. Ashlie Bryant is the co-founder, president, and CEO of 3Strands Global Foundation. Jenny Davidson is the major gifts officer. Find out more online at 3strandsglobalfoundation.org. That's the number 3, strandsglobalfoundation.org. Thank you, ladies, and thank you so much for doing what you do.
Thank you so much.
This has been The Public File. If you'd like us to cover your nonprofit, email sacpsa@odyssey.com, sacpsa@audacy.com. I'm Doug Thomas. Enjoy your Sunday, and go Niners!